But now Tüüne-Kristin Vaikla about spatial time, spatial involvement.
Sisearhitektuuri osakonna juhataja ja külalisprofessor.
She's a visiting professor and works at the Estonian Academy of Arts. Thank you very much. I'm very happy I was invited and to be here in Lihula, but gone always through Lihula, but never really stopped here. So if we talk about time spatial interventions, been the headline, the title says that we're going to talk about what we have done with the students for quite a long time and in my own practice as well. So if you talk about spatial interventions, they always have a time measure as well. There's a big difference. Is this crafted and project design, or there's a design activism where the intervention is brief and the objective is to bring people together to get a link to the community and to see how things would work in place. So over the years, I've had many chances to work on my research subject of repurposing buildings. And a few years ago, I also defended my doctoral thesis on this topic. So I would sum up with this Peter Blake question. So maybe the existing buildings are much better. So we can use them instead of using them in some other way. So not building something new. So this particular picture is taken in Detroit at the Packard car factory. And when I went there a few years ago, then this big factory was still in the process of finding repurposing. So first I would like to introduce a case study. So this is I'm going to reconstruct how we are creating the world with the tools we have through the architecture. We are in Tallinn with this, and this is near the sea. The passenger terminal is quite close, and also the city hall, Noblessner. So here this is the cultural hub, which is a former power plant. So I'm sure that most of you you all know this building if you've been to Tallinn. It's a very exciting building. It's been in different stages and it has worked as a cultural hub since 2010. So then it was Kava architects who prepared this project. So what I'm going to talk about is the project of our space, which we created with Platform Studio, Mikk Meelak and his team. And that was for the presidency, EU presidency in Estonia, and there was a competition held for the spatial creation for high-level space internal architecture solution. And I would really like to praise the fact that the Estonian Republic looked very carefully where we can have this kind of a good space, which would meet all the conditions, and we would have a half a year of these events. And then the outcome was this cultural hub, and mostly in this limestone area, which is an old boiler house built in 1934. And this entire set of buildings is under heritage protection, very valuable building. And actually it caused a lot of questions among the Europeans, because every country who takes over the presidency for half a year is usually organizing their events in the fanciest of rooms. Would it be the castles or the conference centers and sometimes some new modern tents even. But it was different here. And when we take a closer look, so it was important for the urban space. And although today we have been talking about small towns, but if you look a little bit further away, and if you look at the city of Tallinn and the city of Tallinn, if you look at the world at large, then Tallinn is not that big, and it's a small place, and this is often Estonia is the place where people live. But this is where we are in the city of Tallinn, near the port, near the old town. And if you look what are the things around us, then there is not much of a community around. Mostly there is the Estonian Contemporary Art Museum is nearby, which has had recent changes as well. And the existence has been questioned a few times. Then there's a cultural hub itself. And then there's a road which connects us to the promenade, and there's a parking lot. So if we had to make sure this entrance, which is opposite to the petrol station, how to make sure that it looks good on TV as well. If you look at this big entrance, what do we do? Because on one hand, we had to make sure that the entrance will be better looking and activated, and it's not going to be just a new magnet of Tallinn where the event is being held. And on the other hand, we wanted to differentiate this from the petrol station nearby. So the idea was to use the Estonian old type of village fencing, and we're quite brave putting the materials together. The idea was that it will last for half a year, but it's still there. So there's some pictures of the construction work itself, and people used it quite extensively. Also, the going through there with the suitcases to go to the passenger harbour. But as it is such a big political event, then the city space was not really meant for public use the whole time. It was closed every now and then for security reasons. But still, it was a very interesting, natural and traditional approach, creating this fencing there. I can't remember this plant which was used there to create additional shield, but that looked really nice. And the space itself and the interior, because we couldn't really do much to change it, because we did not do anything with the architecture, because the Kava had done this project already years ago. But many of our cooperation partners or the people asked that is it now finally we will fix up this building, but it was not fixed up any more than it already was. So our intervention here was more of a short-term nature. So I'll show you the layout. So if you have not been there recently, so you're moving from right to left, and then there's a boiler room where there are huge boilers in order to burn the oil shale. So that was built in 1948 and 49 after the war, and they actually look quite impressive. And moving forward, we have the black box area, where the European politicians during half a year in a completely black room had to work for hours. So how did we end up with this project was the concept. So it goes on one hand to figure out how to do something in a room based on our profession, but it seems to be to us that we couldn't really quite cope. We needed to have a digital reach as well. So the Estonian identity and the local aspects, this is the nature we have. And the other hand, we want to also refer to the digital aspects, our digital world. So we try to marry these two sides of things. So the wind and nature. So this was the data we collected from the internet. So this was online. And there is, we had wind over internet from one of the furthest off islands, and we transmitted that over internet. And then in the room we had big screens, and above the screens we had the movement sensors, so you could see how people have an impact on the space. So this is something we're always looking for. How do people impact space, and how does the space impact behavior of people? And if there's a pattern, then this pattern can be put into use. So this is the wind. Depends on the weather, it was different. And depends on how the politicians there moved, then it moved differently as well. So in this industrial interior, it functioned really well to create an interesting atmosphere. So you can see some familiar faces there.
Nii. Ja siis selles katelde ruumi.
So this is the boiler room. So how can you send people to an industrial environment where there is nothing there? Because you have to create something. And right now you can see Kartoeva has a digital textile there. So which this is the movement of the wave height of the Bay of Tallinn. And so this activates these threads. So this is the composition, which was vertically visible. And so this created a lot of excitement and interest. Then let's look at the black box. Because the idea was to create a genetic ceiling so that you have interesting things to look at during the long day. I'll show you how the ceiling was built. So this is the workmanship you usually never see. And for different events, they had different... so it was this digital summit, it was autumn. And there were political roundtables. And then in the middle of it, there was a field of sunflowers. And this photo by Annika Haas reached the media as well, so it created a lot of excitement. But if you look at the kinetic ceiling, it didn't quite work out because the way these how the movement should have taken place with the weight of the fabric, it didn't quite work out, but we created the same effect with light. So maybe the same effect with using simpler tools. Now, if you look at the interior of the building again, you can see that this is a very highly political event. And on one hand, you want to show the Estonian local identity, but at the same time, it's the European Common Platform, all the flags. So how do you really display them? So what we can say really is that the space or the topology of the space actually covered a lot, and there's a lot of people there, and people who have been later to this cultural hub. And it has been quite a busy space during other times as well. But we took this material and we used it elsewhere. It was a 5+5. So there are some other Estonian design elements, which you can see from here. So these are the lobbies, which are supposed to look cozy. And this is the official digital summit. So how I would like to sum it up is that I would like to recall how do we teach the students as well, because there's nothing which needs to remain exactly as it is. Quoting the classics, because we should value the change as well. And we should be capable and willing to introduce change. But then the next question is that how do you change? Because for that you need some sort of an anchor. So, of course, not being practical all the time is important, because you need to be occasionally emotional and catch the right atmosphere. So as we're creating this space, we want to be emotional, but you have to be rational and practical at the same time, because otherwise this space cannot serve the purpose. Why do you need the space? So we have at least 3 components here. So one is the physical space, because sometimes it seems to us that the physical space is the only thing which is important for us, because it takes the design, the existing space and the new additions. But there is also mental space and memory and people who were not born yesterday. And as it's been said in previous presentations, that nobody really wants to live only in today, and yesterday is there with us, fortunately, and of course we want to look towards the future at the same time. But what is social space? This is this mysticism, how some of the spaces become places where you can it's easy to communicate, and some are not so good. Then this is something you want to strive towards, to find this key. So on the screen I add all these values, which sometimes might be contradictory, or sometimes one might dominate over another. So art and culture, aesthetics, historical value, user value, sentimental value, research value, educational value, value in time, value as new, market value, connected value, and memorial value. Now, depending on the situation, one is more important than another, but they have all been present, so it really depends how you can really find it out what is in focus right now.
And I'd like to conclude my brief presentation with the sentence that buildings are built for many generations. All of them change their function. But if sometimes the function is not found right away, and because of political or social change, the buildings may be empty, they may stand empty for quite a while. And there is an example from Brussels where sometimes you don't have to interfere in the architectural city space. Sometimes very charming measures of design activism can bring together many people and be very efficient. So thank you very much indeed, and if there are any questions, I'm more than willing to answer them. Thank you. I'd like to ask myself, first of all, how does climate change and loss of biodiversity impact internal design, internal architecture? Are you moving towards shrinkage and sustainability? Yes, of course. And we need to pay attention to where are the windows. Should you cover them up, or do you need to open them up? We need to consider technological solutions and whether it's always on the agenda. And namely, the fact that we can't do everything that we want to. Very often we are forced to do less, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. Like a colleague said, the less money, the better the results. It simply makes people think more. We still have the rule, if you have something to say, put up your hand. But thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Kristin.